I'm so glad not to be on crutches this week. This is a first in 5 weeks. I feel like running around the stage. I've been told we're running a bit over, so I'm going to try to keep to this brutally short time period. And so if there's anything that you see today on the slides or that you hear me say that you don't understand, my contact information is on the Hong Kong U web pages. Call me, send me an email. You know, I'd be happy to talk with you. I'm the first person up here today who's going to talk about the other side of open data, from the side of the suppliers and not from the side of the users or researchers, okay? Now, let me make it perfectly clear. Archivists are not the only suppliers of open data. Much of the open data is still to be found within corporations or within government offices, bureaus, departments, whatever. So my view is not the whole view, okay? But because I've spent much of my life as a provider of records for other people's research, I think that it might be interesting for you to hear that side of it. Okay. First of all, these are sort of some of the questions I want to talk about today. I realize that there are many people here in the audience who are quite well aware of what an archivist is, and what archivists do. But I have also been absolutely gobsmacked by the amount of people I run into who don't. Okay, so quickly, for those of you who don't, I'm going to run through that at the beginning. But the slides that I really want you to focus on today, to get an idea of what the archivist's core values and code of ethics, what that leads us to promote as part of our profession, will be slides like 6 through 10, okay? And then the last, links. So if you want to have a little sleep now, that's fine. Okay, so so these are the questions I'm going to touch on today. And the first one, what are archives? You know, I hear people use archives as a verb all the time now. Oh, I'm going to archive that. And what they mean is to store. That's a very tiny part of what an archivist does, okay? So when an archivist uses the word, and these definitions are taken from the Society of American Archivists web pages, in case you're wondering, we usually use it in one of 3 ways. The word archives, with all lowercase, means the collection itself. This is the archive of X, Mr. X, or Company C, or Government A, right? And it refers to the records that are kept because they have continuing value to the creating agency and to other potential users, right? Like users of big data. Sometimes these records include big data. And they are the facts that we use to interpret and understand history because they're documentary evidence, okay? They are primary sources, okay? You would be amazed at what a small percentage of the records we create in any given organization, business, government, you know, church, NGO, whatever. You would be amazed at the tiny, tiny percentage of the whole that we actually keep for the archives. Most of my job as an archivist is appraisal. I tell you what to throw out and when to throw it out because we don't want it in the archives, because we cannot possibly keep all of the stuff that we generate in a given year at Hong Kong U or in the HKSAR or at HSBC or in any of the archives here in Hong Kong or anywhere in the world. So, secondly, an archive's often written with a capital A, and we almost always say archives. We hardly ever say archive. I don't know how that happened, but it's just the way it is. It's an organization, so here's the collections. This is the organization dedicated to preserving the documentary heritage of a particular group. And that can be a government, a business, a school, a hospital. It's generally an organization, okay? When we have what we would think of as an archive or a collection from an individual, we tend to refer to that as personal papers or manuscripts, depending on the nature of that personal collection. Many of those things end up in archives with a capital A, but generally we tend to be related to big organizations, okay? And then finally, the third way professionals use the word archives is the building itself. I'm going to the archives in Kwun Tong, right? Like I'm going to the public records office. The archive means the building. So, archivists, what are we? What do we do with our time? We are the people who collect and, first we make the decision about what to collect. So that is assessment or appraisal. Then we collect, we organize, we preserve, and we provide access. And providing the access ties back to the organize, because it's during processing these collections that we create arrangement and description for them. And unlike in a library where you have an artificial organization of arrangement, right, like the Dewey Decimal System or the online catalog Library of Congress system that organizes published materials according to certain criteria like title, author, subject. An archive is actually an organic representation of that which created it. All right? So archivists organize things according to the creator, to the department or bureau that it came from, right? To the person that collected it. So when you go into an archive, you're going to need a little bit more help from the archivist to get to what you need than you would if you walk into a library where that artificial system's already set out for you and you already understand about it because you've been going to libraries for a long time. Okay? So archivists, we are a profession like being a lawyer or an engineer or a dentist or whatever. And so we have professional positions that we require of our members to adhere to national and international standards of practice and in accordance with a professional code of ethics. And this statement, the majority of professional archivists hold a baccalaureate degree and many may have, I think that's actually a bit outdated. I haven't met a professional archivist in more than a decade who doesn't have one or more master's degrees, possibly a doctorate, and it is now a requirement, even in order to sit and take the test to become a member of the academy, to have 2 years of professional experience and at least one master's degree. So that sort of tells you a little bit about what we are. One of the things that I think it's really important to touch on here is archivists don't work in a vacuum. None of us do, right? And the two professions that we are most closely related to right now are records managers. In fact, some of us often, in the case of universities, also act as the records managers for our organizations. Within the Hong Kong government, the archives is a part of the government records service, right? And the other profession that we work quite closely with now is IT. The reason for that is it's multifold, but we work with records management during the life cycle of the records to help them determine what goes and what stays, how records are classified and scheduled, how we build retention schedules, when things can be safely destroyed, and what ultimately will end up in the archives, all right? In a sense, archives and records management, and that's the way it's referred to in many graduate schools, ARM, that's a single profession. In some countries it's seen as two, but worldwide it tends to be seen as a single profession. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is IT, and it's because of this. Increasingly, records managers and archivists work with electronic records, and that necessitates us becoming familiar with digital record keeping and what that entails, and that we work in tandem with those departments within our business or our government or wherever it is we're being an archivist, to bring all of those groups' expertise to bear on the problems of creating, preserving, and providing access to digital records. And here's the scoop. In the beginning of the digital age, we worked with records that were hard copy and then were digitized. Now almost everything is born digital. And the lifespan of the record has become the concern of the archivist from the get-go. We no longer can sit and wait. It has to be done from the planning period, from the minute those records were born. So, Hiya! Okay. Preservation and use. Very simply, there is no point in saving things if you are not going to use them. That's almost the sum of my profession. There is no point in saving it if you're not going to use it. So, hence the weeding and the appraisal and the trying to decide, okay, we have a limited amount of money, space, time, and staff. What are we going to save? And when an archivist talks about preserving things, we're not talking about the next 10 years. You may have noticed tonight, every single person using data referred to, oh, well, this is old, this is from 10 years ago, and I need the more newer data. That is not how an archivist thinks. The archivist is thinking all the time, oh my God, how am I going to preserve this electronic data for the next 100, 200, 500 years? Okay? So we have some problems with that, and I mentioned it at the bottom. Electronic records are inherently unstable because they're electromagnetic. They're not easy to authenticate. They're difficult to secure. And they're really, really expensive to preserve over long periods of time as opposed to hard copy. But those are problems that the archives profession as a whole has been working on for a long time now, like since before the invention of the internet. Okay, whoops, I went too far. So I'm gonna, say one thing too about that. Digitizing stuff it does help us preserve the originals when the originals are hard copy because it allows us to boing, send that information out over the net. People can use it, never look at the originals, never have to touch them. But the digital images themselves are not the preservation. It's the fact that they're keeping you from using the other stuff. So, I would strongly recommend, and I have the links at the end of this talk, that you take a good look at the Society of American Archivists website and also the International Council on Archives website if you'd like to know more about our profession as providers of records or purveyors of records. But I think I can sum the core values of archivists and also our code of ethics by pointing out just one thing on each page. Although access may be limited in some instances, archivists seek to promote open access and use when possible. That's our whole deal. We want to make it available. We want to make it available as fast as we can, to as many people as we can, in as equitable a manner as possible. And that means I don't ask you who you are and what you're going to do with the records. If you have proper ID and you show up in my archives, if it's open to you. It's not open because of who you know or what you're going to do with the records. I don't make value judgments like that. It's either open or it's closed. And if it's closed because it would be in violation of the law to open it at that time. I do not keep records in the archives that cannot ever be opened. Would be pointless, wouldn't it? Eventually, it will be open, and we like to have a finite date about that when we take them in, okay? And the Code of Ethics here says, recognizing that use is the fundamental reason for keeping archives, archivists actively promote open and equitable access to records in their care within the context of their institution's mission and their intended user groups. They minimize restrictions, they maximize ease of access, they facilitate the continuing accessibility and intelligibility of archival materials in all formats. Just like the law equally applies to a record is a record is a record, whether it's hard copy or in electronic format, we want to keep things available as long as we possibly can to as many people as we can in whatever format it was born in. Okay, so many of you know that I'm a member, although today I'm not representing the subcommittee, a member of the subcommittee on archives law for the Law Reform Commission. And you may also know that I work as a member of the governing board for the section on University and Research Institute archives for the International Council on Archives. Here's the scoop. I'm gung-ho about both the archives and the access law as my personal opinion as a professional archivist. I think it will help to support all of my fellow archivists in their profession. I think it will support and promote open data and open records of all kinds. The sooner the better. It will, as I've said, give us a framework and a more successful approach to having good archives and records management practices. And even though the laws that the subcommittees are looking at apply only to government records, I can tell you from past experience from working with my British counterparts when they were adopting their first access law and reworking their archives law in Britain around the turn of the last century, it will make a huge difference because it will trickle down and out through society. People will become much less concerned with reasons for privacy that aren't always necessary, right? So, and at the end I put here the ICA, these are two statements from their Universal Declaration on Archives, okay? And you can go to their webpage and find this. The ICA believes that effective records and archives management is an essential precondition for good governance, the rule of law, administrative transparency, the preservation of mankind's collective memory, and access to information by citizens. We therefore undertake to work together in order that appropriate national archive policies and laws are adopted and enforced, and that archives are made accessible to everyone while respecting the pertinent laws and the rights of individuals, creators, owners, and users. That pretty much says it all, doesn't it? So, my last page here is a list of links for you. The International Council on Archives Universal Statement's got a Cantonese version, so for anybody who's more comfortable with that, boom, there you go. And the Society of American Archivists homepage. These are the two links for the consultancy report. May I remind everybody here, you've got 3 weeks left to comment, and we want to hear you. Take the time to write and send your comments about either one of the subcommittee's reports into these two links, please. And then the final one is the International Standards Organization, and this is their catalog page online for their electronic archives and records management. So those of you who are interested in sort of policy stuff, you can have a look there. Okay? Thanks very much.